we had some audio-visual issues. The speaker system within the boardroom was not working, so we took a little bit more time to come up with a short-term fix. Hopefully, those online are able to hear me. And those of us in the room, if the overhead speakers don't work, we may just have to project our voices so that we can all hear each other, those of us. But we have it online for those participating virtually. My apologies for the technical difficulties, but Chair Collins is participating virtually, and I'm going to turn it over to him to get us started. Mr. Collins.
Yes, and good afternoon to everyone. The March 15th, 2023 Transportation Planning Board meeting is now officially called to order in a hybrid status. If you are having any issues virtually, please call, email, or text staff if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. I mean, we are very resilient. Please understand we'll figure it out one way or the other. I will briefly review the process as it relates to this hybrid meeting today. We will first start with a roll call of board members that are participating today. During agenda items, I will have presenters complete their briefing and then we'll return to members for questions and comments. I will call on members by jurisdictions. First, those who are in the room and then those online. Conti and Lynn will assist me by identifying those in the room who wish to be recognized and also online who may have posted a chat or have their hands raised to be recognized. As it relates to votes, I will ask just for nays and abstentions, presuming that if you're silent, that those particular votes will eventually pass as a positive vote. Lastly, while we have started accepting comments from the public in person during our in-person meetings, we're continuing the practice of receiving public comments online. After the roll call today, I will first recognize members of the public who are here to provide their comments. Then I will ask staff to summarize comments received online. A copy of these comments received online is available to us on the meeting webpage. So I'm asking Lynn now if you could please begin the roll call.
Great, thank you, Chair Collins. So as usual, I will list the your jurisdiction or agency, and if you could state your name, we will capture your attendance. Let's start with the District of Columbia, DC Council, Ms. Brooke Pinto. DC Council, Charles Allen.
I'm here.
Thanks. DC Council, Christina Henderson.
I'm here.
Thanks. DC Department of Transportation.
Anna Chamberlain here.
Thanks, Anna. And Mark is here as well. DC Office of Planning.
Dana Marine is here.
Thanks, Dan. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie.
Maddie Bizzurdo is here.
Thank you. Charles County.
Present.
Thank you. College Park. Frederick County. Thank you. City of Frederick. Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is present.
Thanks, Neil. City of Greenbelt.
Emmett Jordan is present.
City of Laurel.
Brian Lee is here.
Montgomery County. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Arnrich is here.
Gary. Prince George's County. Prince George's County Council. City of Brockville. Tacoma Park. Maryland Department of Transportation. Oh, okay, thank you. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Heather Murphy, present.
Maryland House of Representatives. And Maryland Senate. I think they're busy right now. Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria. Thanks, Kenneth. Arlington County.
Takis Karantanis, I'm here virtually.
Thanks, Takis. City of Fairfax. Thank you. Fairfax County.
James Watershaw's here.
Thank you. Falls Church. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger here.
Is Adam? Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt here.
City of Manassas.
Pam Sabeski here virtually.
Okay. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Virschel here.
Thanks, Jeanette. Prince William County.
This is Paulo Belita, alternate.
Thanks, Paulo. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Bill Cutler here.
Thank you. Virginia House of Representatives. Virginia Senate.
Present.
Oh, thank you. WMATA. I got a text from Allison. She's on her way, by the way. She'll be here. Ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Capital Planning Commission, Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and National Park Service. That concludes roll call. Oh, thank you. That concludes roll call. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Lynn. So at this time, what is part of our practice is there's an opportunity for public comments for those that are in the room. And so leading up to that, Lynn, are there any individuals that would like to make comments from the public directly?
Yes, Mr. Jason Stanford, and we'll just make sure your microphone's on. Good. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Jason Stanford, and I'm the president of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance. I'm here today to comment on the Visualize 2050 process to provide key facts that I think are critical to the conversation around greenhouse gas emissions and zero-based budget approach. As you all know, we just completed Visualize 2045, and in that process, TPB found that the current plan, which includes both roadway and transit improvements, will meet all federal air quality standards and reduce air pollution in our region. Density and high-capacity transit corridors, which has gone up by about 30% over the last decade, will nearly double over the next 20 years, showing the region's commitment to dense transit-oriented development. However, even with those changes, 80% of the land use that will be on the ground in 2045 is already on the ground today. Additionally, 2/3 of our transportation dollars over the next 2 decades will be spent on our transit system. High-capacity transit lane miles will increase 28%, while roadway lane miles will only increase by 5%. Transit trips will increase by 28%, and walk and bike trips by 39%. Access to jobs via transit goes up by 34%, while access to jobs via automobile goes up by 1%. And still by 2045, 7% of the trips in our region will be taken via transit, and 80% will be taken via automobile. And if we do not build the planned transportation improvements and Visualize 2045, access to jobs via automobile goes down nearly 10%. Additional analysis from the TPB shows that eliminating all of the roadway projects in our region, but keeping the transit projects will only reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 3%. However, daily vehicle hours of delay across our region will increase by nearly 30%. The TPB's own climate change mitigation study found that taking the most aggressive electric vehicle approach could reduce emissions by 92% by 2050 compared to the current baseline, whereas the most aggressive mode shift strategies would only reduce emissions by 17%, nowhere near the TPB's stated goals. Finally, the Alliance conducted a survey of DC area residents in 2022 and found that eliminating funding for roadway improvements as a climate mitigation strategy was opposed by 61% of residents and only supported by 19%. These projects are in the plan because they are a critical part of the local transportation and land use plans for our region. I urge you to look beyond what works for your individual communities and think about the needs of people throughout the region. The 2022 State of Commute Survey showed that 61% of people with household incomes less than $60,000 rely on automobiles as their primary mode to get to work. If we make it harder to build more transportation projects, we are going to further stifle the economic competitiveness of the DC area. While we may not always agree on every project, I think the DC region and the TPB does an exceptional job of planning for all modes of transportation to accommodate the expected growth of our region. I urge you to continue this comprehensive, regionally collaborative approach to transportation. It's absolutely critical to the success of our region and essential if we hope to maintain the quality of life and economic prosperity that makes our community such a great place to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any additional comments from the public?
No, that's all. That's the only person that had signed up.
All right,
I
thank you.
do have comments. I'd like to share a summary of comments, if that's okay at this time, Chair Collins.
Of course.
Thank you. So between the February 2023 TPB meeting and noon on Tuesday, March 14th, the TPB received 7 comments submitted by email, 7 comments from our new Visualize 2045 initial project list feedback form, and 1 request for in-person public comment, which you just heard. A memo with a summary of the comments, as well as the entire set of comments, can be found on our TPB meeting page. As I mentioned last month, we've created a project list feedback form on our comment page to help share specific project comments with project sponsors. We will be sharing the comments twice a month, both at our technical committee meetings and here at TPB. Those comments are attached to this memo, and it will keep a rolling tab throughout this process. In addition, Casey Kostick, a former TPB member, shared a letter about the technical input solicitation for our long-range transportation plan, which was referred to back in the February meeting. We've included it in this mail out. At that time, she asked the TPB to consider several questions and clarify that definitions and measurable data will help understand if projects meet the synthesized policy framework. She followed up on that letter this week and asked the TPB to consider how the questions in that technical solicitation process can be modified to better measure and assess whether the projects meet TPB's goals and aspirations. She also asked the TPB to consider a TPB-wide discussion on project priorities before the submission process. Tad Aburn, a former Maryland Department of the Environment representative on our Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, provided letters following up to his comments on February 14th. His letter asked TPB to provide an update on activities that the board or its members are taking to meet climate change goals, and including carbon dioxide as part of the transportation conformity process. In addition, enclosed is a letter he submitted to COG's Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. He also provided comment asking the TPB to consider the need for additional climate change considerations in transportation issues. He added concerns that the Visualize 2045 environmental justice analysis did not address health and environmental risk to vulnerable populations. In addition, there are enclosed supporting letters to his comment. Arlene Montemarano shared an article, Lessons Learned from Boston Could Shape a More Collaborative Process on the I-495 Toll Lanes Project by Arthur Katz, with commentary celebrating Boston's transportation decisions. She also shared a statement from Transurban about the Maryland Express Lanes project. She expressed gratitude to different people involved in advocacy efforts about the project. And lastly, Bill Pugh, our Senior Policy Fellow of the Coalition for Smarter Growth, provided comment asking for members of the public to watch the Visualize 2050 listening sessions for transparency in the zero-based budgeting process and a more informed public feedback. As I mentioned, all the comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report, Chair Collins. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dave Marsden checking in from the Virginia Senate. Sorry I'm a little late.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for that update on public comments. We'll now begin to move forward with the second item on the agenda, which is the Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. The second item of the agenda is approval of the February 15th, 2023 minutes. And as I stated before, to expedite the process, because this is a hybrid meeting, we will request if there are any nays or abstentions to begin the process of approving the minutes. Are there any nays or abstention to the February 15th, 2023 minutes?
Mr. Chair, I have Mr. Ross from City of Fairfax, who was not at the previous meeting, abstaining.
Okay. Do we have any additional abstentions?
This is Dan.
Emmett Jordan from Greenbelt. I abstain.
Okay.
To be clear, I just want to say, so Dan Emerine abstained and Mayor Emmett Jordan abstained.
That's right. Thank you.
Are there any further abstentions or nays? Assuming that there are any additionals, the approval of the minutes for February 15th have passed. We will now move towards the technical committee report by Mr. Mark Rollins, who is the chair of the technical committee. Mr. Rollins, do you have any thing that you would like to add or review at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, the tech committee met on March 3rd. A written meeting summary is included with the meeting materials, my report brief. 2 items were reviewed on conclusion at today's meeting agenda. The committee received a briefing on the draft FY 2024 work program. It has to approve that work program at today's meeting. The committee was briefed on the draft FY 2024 connections work program. The board will be asked to approve the FY 2024 work community connections work program. Additionally, 6 items were presented for information and discussion. The committee was briefed on the outline for a work session, which is now scheduled to take place immediately prior to the April 19th board meeting to discuss key issues for the Ramada Better project. Staff reported on public comments received, shared format and expectations for the TPB project input listening sessions. Staff shared findings from interviews with peer MPOs in the fall of 2022 and discussed next steps. Staff reported on the volume of bicycles and pedestrians recorded by continuous count stations before, during, and after the pandemic, with a focus on Arlington County. The committee was briefed on the military installation resilience in the National Capital Region, focusing on transportation element. And the committee was briefed on the federal certification review of the TPB. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I understand Mr. Collins is having some audio difficulties. Mr. Walkinshaw, since you're here, if you want to move us to the next item. We will look into whether that audio difficulty is with everybody.
Advisory committee report and next.
Well,
Mr. Richard Wallace, why don't you go ahead and give us your report for the CAC? You're smiling, thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. We met, the CAC met last on the 9th, and we had a very vibrant exchange of ideas. We were briefed by the Federal Certification Review Board members. We went over several different questions that were asked to us and posed to us. 2 of them stood out to me. One was, how effective is public involvement in transportation planning conducted by the National Capital Region? Another question was, what methods to encourage involvement are working and what are not? And of course, there was lots of ideas thrown out there by CAC members. One area we discussed was meeting communities where they are and working with trusted community leaders and organizations. So basically, working with our local elected officials, for example, working within our community, asking citizens of their thoughts and ideas. But some members believe that the citizens may, kept out of the planning process, the conversation process, and until it's too late. So we got to find a way to kind of include members, our citizens earlier within our discussions. Greater emphasis on early and continuing public inputs as a regional priority. So again, there's lots of things that was exchanged here. We also talked about using technology for greater outreach. Not just, we have so much access to social media. We all have a cell phone. We all have computers for the most part now. I think we can connect with our citizens a lot broader and easier. So these are some of the things that we discussed. You'll see there in your handout. So we also talked about the clarification were needed on the green and orange list priorities. And TPB members did elaborate further on that. So, but there's a need for more transparency, and that's what's brought up. And that is basically the summarization of our discussion on last Tuesday, the 3rd and the 9th, I think it was. So any questions, I'm standing by. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Any questions from those in the room? Glenn, do we have any members online who wish to be recognized? No. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wallace. Next, we had the first meeting of our Access for All Advisory Committee earlier this month. Vice Chair Henderson chaired that meeting, and we have a written summary of the meeting. Vice Chair Henderson, anything from that meeting you'd like to highlight for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw. The Access for All Advisory Committee met virtually on February 27th. The committee discussed the Visualize 2050 kickoff, the results of the Visualize 2045 environmental justice analysis, and the update to the Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan. As a reminder, the coordinated plan guides funding decisions for the Federal Transit Administration's Enhanced Mobility Program by identifying strategies and projects that help to meet the transportation needs of people with disabilities, older adults, and those with low incomes. There will be a presentation on the coordinated plan to the TPB at our April meeting. The Access for All Committee will also meet in April virtually on April 24th. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Henderson. Any questions in the room on that update? Anyone online should be recognized? No? All right, next item on the agenda is Chairman's remarks, and we have the Chairman.
Yeah, we have steering committee actions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That might buy us a little bit more time to see.
All right. Okay, great. Now
Actually, this is I'm back on. So
okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay.
Please, everyone, forgive me. I mean, this is one of the amazing things of these hybrid type meetings. So please forgive me. But when we started in January, I said that 2023 would be a very important year for all of us.
Chair Collins, I am yet to give my steering committee report. If I could do that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think we were just getting started when you joined us back. Thank you kindly.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So you all have a copy of my written report, so I will not review all of it. Instead, I'll just provide a brief overview. The steering committee met on March 3rd and approved 4 amendments to our FY23, FY2026 TIP. First was at the request of the district's Department of Transportation that added a net of $5 million for a number of safety improvement projects citywide, and the details of those projects are on pages 4 through 12. The second amendment was at the request of TPB staff for the commuter connections, and this is a piece of good news where we were able to apply and secure a FTA grant to pilot test a program to use underutilized van pools in the region to serve as on-demand transit for those people who do not have transit service available, particularly within the equity emphasis areas. We are developing an app that can be used, and we are going to pilot test this, and we have federal FTA money to do that. So that amendment was approved, and details of the program are on pages 13 through 17. The third amendment was at the request of Virginia Department of Transportation that adds a net total of about $55.5 million for several transit travel demand management projects, and that includes VRE rolling stock acquisition, PRTC's commuter assistance program, as well as the Pope's Head Road interchange project. And the last tip amendment was at the request of our federal partners. Federal Highway has an Eastern Federal Lands Division. They have projects in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, and the federal funding available for them to continue with those projects and programs and studies have been officially amended into the TPB's TIP. Details of all of those projects and the funding are on pages 31 through 36. Under the letters sent and received section of your packet, there are a few letters of support from the TPB for its members who are seeking federal funding assistance. The city of Gaithersburg is seeking funding assistance. That letter is on page 38. Montgomery County, city of Alexandria. There's also a letter from the TPB that is signed by the chair and the two vice chairs, addressed to the mayor of the District of Columbia, to the governor of Maryland, and to the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, drawing their attention to and urging their continued support and action to address the unacceptable levels of fatalities on the regional roadways. This was something that the board advised staff to do in December. We were waiting for the new transportation secretary and the officers to be to take office. So that letter has been sent. Under announcements and updates, information on the grants available from Maryland Department of Transportation for the transportation alternative projects may be found on page 48. And also, just as an FYI, your staff, will be assisting the 3 airports in this region conduct an air passenger survey, but we will be pre-testing that survey this spring. So if any of your constituents or if any of you get that survey pre-test, please do take that test. It'll help us refine the survey instrument. A couple of other announcements that are not in my report, Mr. Chair. The TPB annually undertakes a safety campaign. We call it the Street Smart Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Campaign. And the spring campaign will be running from April 17th through May 14th. And the event will be kicked off in Maryland this time. It will be on April 13th at the Marion Fryer Town Plaza in Wheaton, Maryland. On another item, on March 8th and 9th, your staff, along with staffs of your local transportation agencies, participated in a 2-day federal review process. This is the process through which Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration representatives come and review all of the work that the TPB does and the process that we follow in doing that work. They do this, we call it the audit. We undergo this audit once every 4 years. So the quadrennial audit was earlier last week on 8th and 9th. There was a 2 days worth of sessions. Every aspect of the work that we do was reviewed. And we will get a written report from the feds later, and it will be presented to the board. There was a lot of recognition of some of the work that we have done, and I want to pass that on to the TPB, particularly the climate change mitigation study and the goals that this board adopted just for the transportation sector is something that no other MPO has done in the country. So the board deserves credit for its insight. And the current federal administration has now proposed that they are thinking of adding greenhouse gas reduction goals as part of the TPB activities. This board will be pleased to know that it's been doing that work since 2010. So that was one of the special acknowledgements that we received from the feds. I have one more general announcement. Members will recall that last month the board kicked off the process of updating our long-range plan that we adopted last year. We are now scheduled to adopt a new long-range plan that we are calling Visualize 2050. It goes all the way through year 2050. Our schedule is to adopt that plan December of next year. But there are some interim important milestones before we get to December of 2024. And that is, we've asked all of your transportation agencies, there are 23 transportation agencies that work with us. We've asked all of them to submit revised revenue estimates between now and 2050. The transportation, whether it's highway, transit, walk, bike, doesn't matter. What are the total revenues you anticipate having between now and 2050? Federal money, state money, local bonds, private sector money, developer funds, whatever. And then also we have asked them to re-examine every project that they had in our current plan, to re-examine it with the intent of saying, will this advance several of the TPB goals that we have adopted over the years starting in 1998, and also to ensure that the projects that they submit is fully paid for by the revenues that is available, because that's a critical federal requirement. So that input of revised financial information, revised revenues, revised project list, revised operating and maintenance costs, they are all due to us by end of June. And the TPB is scheduled to approve staff using that list of projects to do a 9-month-long technical analysis in November of this year. That's the time frame that we have. We've been working with your staffs over the past 4 months in all of this work. I'm glad to note that they are all working very diligently, but every single one of them had told us that this is going to be a very heavy lift. We are spending good quality time reviewing everything. Today you saw public comments are already being received. We are reviewing every public comment, sharing it with the appropriate agency and assisting them to respond to those comments. All of this work is going on. That said, of the 267 projects that are in the plan, there are 2 major projects, significant projects, both in terms of the funding for those projects and the impact it will have on the region. And that is the Maryland Ops Lane project, Express Lanes project, and then the metro. I'm calling the metro system as a single project because about 45% of our total money that will be spent over the next 25 years goes to metro. We are both aware that there has been some issues that are still outstanding in revising those projects. And we've been working with Maryland Department of Transportation and WMATA to get a better handle on, will they be ready to provide revisions and a revised plan by end of June? And what we hear is they are working diligently, but giving us a realistic set of agreed upon revenues and the project scope by June for both of them is going to be extremely challenging. So it's staff suggestion, recommendation today that the TPB consider adding additional time to receive these inputs, because when accepting something by June, the board may be accepting a set of assumptions that probably is not final and perhaps not realistic. Providing both entities some additional time will benefit the TPB, put forth a new long-range plan that is more realistic. That's the staff recommendation. I'll take just 2 more minutes to give some brief background on both projects. With the Maryland Express Lane project, I think the board generally understood that the new administration was going to re-examine the project for its scope and for its timing. And I understand that that work is ongoing. However, over the last previous weekend, there were some additional developments that has added additional complexities to their discussions and considerations. The private sector entity that was going to fund the project is currently not participating in the program. So that is an additional thing for them to do. It's not just what will the scope of the project be, but how will the project even be financed and delivered. I understand all of those discussions are ongoing, but to resolve all of them by June will be challenging. With the metro, we are all aware that in the pandemic-related disruptions, transit ridership has really is lagging. It is coming back, but not quite at the pace we would have liked, and that is having some real impact on the operating revenues for the system because fare was a significant component of operating revenues. So WMATA currently is facing somewhere in the ballpark of $750 million per year deficit to operate its system. They are aware of it. They are working on it. But they don't have a solution yet to turn into us to say, here are our revenues, here is the service level of transit we want you to assume in your plan, and here are the transit fare assumptions you need to make. They are working on it. So we've met with Metro. So those are the primary reasons why staff recommends we consider. It's not a decision we have to make today. We'll bring it back to the board agenda next month. We will also present to you a revised schedule document that the board can adopt. So that's the last item from the director's report, Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn it back to you and happy to answer any questions.
At this time, are there any questions for Conti?
Yeah, Mr. Brian Lee from Laurel has a question here.
Yes, thank you. Issue of the audit. Who will be getting copies of the, what are some of the audit?
Right. The TPB will receive a report, detailed report. The audit requirements are essentially, is the TPB following the federal requirements and regulations in doing the work activities that they do, right? So I've said majority of the work that TPB does is specified by the federal entities. Not only the work that we do, but also how we are supposed to do that work. It's very prescribed work activities. So they were reviewing. So the audit requirement is to ensure, A, we are doing all the things that we are supposed to do. B, we are following the process. And C, a review of the products that we produce. So those are the three broad themes that they look at. And as part of that, we have used that opportunity to bring to the federal partners' attention things that the TPB does that is not even required, but that greatly enhances the regional planning that we do. For example, the aspirational initiatives work that we did over 2 years that Mayor Newton had initiated, which really, for the first time, provided the TPB to include non-financially constrained aspirations for transportation system. It's not required by the feds, but we did it. We spent 2 years collectively agreeing on a set of things. The second such example is the climate change mitigation study. We spent about 18 months doing that study. That ended up adopting a new policy priority, adding to the other policy priorities we had. So we take the opportunity to share that work with them as well as part of this audit. So I'm hoping that we will receive some commendations for the extra work that we've done. But personally, as your staff, I'm very interested in receiving any recommendations. Can we do anything better that we are already doing? And certainly, are we missing anything? Because we definitely don't want to miss. our goal is to be a high-performing MPO. Thanks.
Thank you, Kanti. So I just wanted to take a few minutes with the chairman's remarks at this time. When we started in January of 2023, I articulated how important this period was as it related to long-range transportation planning and the role that TPB would have in this region. We talked about the whole impact of teleworking on our region, what that meant in terms of office impact travel, for rail in particular with Metro, MARC, and VRE systems. We also talked about, long range planning and updating that. And we kicked that off last month, and we provided an opportunity to bring thinking on all of these factors together when we started looking at the future of our long range approach to planning. The idea with reestablishing 2050 as a goal was to re-examine our previous transportation investment plans. The projects and policies that we've had, determine how would these changes to address the changing travel demand meet the demands for newly emerging travel patterns, changes in the modes of travel people will be using, and how best to use additional federal funding and transportation from new administrations. And if we think about it, we have a new administration that started in Virginia and a new administration in the state of Maryland. And so a lot of the thinking we have to put in perspective has changed somewhat. And so the idea of revisiting and looking at that has been extremely important to staff and how we approach moving forward. We recognize that there are great uncertainties at the present time on many of these factors that we consider in making long-term decisions. So what has been presented by Conti earlier is an approach recognizing the impact of having new administrations and some of the larger scale plans and policies that have been in place to provide an opportunity for Maryland and this new administration to look at that very important project that was very dominant 2 years ago with the TPB and the direction that we took. Recognizing that and providing an opportunity. And again, I want to be clear, this entire process is totally transparent. It's an opportunity for all of the jurisdictions that are part of TPB to weigh in. But the suggestion is, to not to change anything dramatically or anything, but to provide additional opportunity and not a significant amount of time, but a little more time to provide for the new administrations to kind of, revamp, if you will, projects that are in place and to kind of make a determination on, their views of these very specific projects. I am more in line with providing more time for that process. But again, I don't make decisions as an individual. And that's why I made it very clear that this is a very transparent process. And it's an opportunity for all of us to weigh in. And so as Conti made very clear, this is not on the agenda today, but this will be a follow-up agenda matter with our next meeting. And it will be an opportunity for all of us to talk about what that actually means. I can tell you where I can tell you personally, it provides an additional opportunity for the most important project in Southern Maryland to be on the table, which is Southern Maryland Rapid Transit. So, I'm being very clear with you. I look at this as an opportunity to reestablish, something that is a project regionally, and very specific to, the area where I live. And so this is an opportunity to kind of revisit, look at these things again. And so that's really the extent of my comments today, but I want to make it clear, there will be ample opportunity for us to kind of engage on, how this looks leading up to the future. And with that, I want to see if Conti or Lynn see anyone that would like to respond to anything that I'm saying before we move forward.
Mr. Chair, I don't see any hands raised here.
And Lynn, do you see anyone online?
No.
Okay, all right. So what we will do at this time, the next item on the agenda, and wow, we are exactly on time. This is crazy. But the next item is an amendment to the FY 2023 Unified Planning Work Program, FY 2023 carryover funding to FY 2024, and approval of the FY 2024 UPWP.
Thank you, Chair Collins. So normally I would be at the podium, but I do want to point out to you all these little white hockey pucks in the room. That's the only way people online are hearing us. So even if you turn your microphone on, unless you're projecting, people aren't hearing you. So if you do have questions, just make sure you're loud. That's why I'm going to sit here and do this. So anyway, that was my little digression. So Unified Planning Work Program, this is the third time you've seen me this year. You saw me back in January where we talked about what is the UPWP? What is your role? What is the involvement? We talked about all the work that the staff does every year. Last month, we went ahead and dove way into the details of the Unified Planning Work Program, all the new activities, and I'm really glad, besides that, I always do that, really glad that we did. We talked a little bit about our federal audit that we just had. We had 1 hour on the agenda to talk about the UPWP, and I don't want to say shaking in my shoes, but you never know what they're going to ask. So basically, we had our new UPWP. We talked about it. They had some great questions about what are we doing in the upcoming year. And I threw up that presentation that I had just given you, and we had a great conversation. So they're fine with our UPWP. I hope you guys had a chance to look at it again. We're asking you to do 2 things today. There are 2 resolutions before you. One is to actually amend the current, pull out some projects that we're not finishing this year. And the second is to approve the Unified Planning Work Program. So just a brief recap, what is carryover? What is this first action that we're doing? The funding comes from 3 buckets. It comes from new funding, and that includes the IIJA funding. Old funding from last year's UPWP, things that we just couldn't get to or finish this year. As you all know, like I'm down 1 planning manager. So yeah, we had a lot of extra money in some of these tasks. So we put it all in a memo. You've seen it 2 months in a row. The carryover has been identified from tasks 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 11. It's about $2 million. We actually wrote that into the fiscal 2024 Unified Planning Work Program, so we didn't miss a beat here. And our total amount for fiscal 2024 UPWP ended up at about $25 million. That's after we did the back and forth with our states as they were trying to figure out how much funding they had available to all their NPOs. And so that's where we ended up. So after you guys take action today, I submit the 2024 UPWP to the U.S. Department of Transportation. It is one of 2 documents that they approve. They don't approve a lot. So they usually take about 60 days. Meanwhile, we'll receive funding authorization from our partners who are the actual recipients of the funding, and work begins on July 1st. So today, staff recommends approval first. I'm going to ask you guys to adopt resolution R7-2023. Again, that's to pull money out of the current UPWP and roll it over. And then the second is to adopt resolution R8-2023 that approves it all in the final 2024 UPWP document that you have before you. So Chair Collins, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
So I will ask Conti, but this is generally for the floor. Are there any questions directly to Lynn at this time?
Dave Snyder has a question.
Thank you very much. We're all been informed about the looming deficit at Metro. Is there anything in the UPWP that provides the resources and support to help address at a regional level the Metro funding gap that will be triggered starting not this coming fiscal year, but the fiscal year afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. This is Kanti. The UPWP does not provide any direct funding for doing any sort of financial analysis for Metro. It is our understanding that Metro is currently engaged in a detailed analysis to bring to the region what the deficits are, what are the time periods, what options there might be to address the deficit. So there isn't anything that the UPWP explicitly provides for. That said, the TPB have staff with some expertise in regional transit planning. We have staff with some expertise in demand forecasting. So as part of those discussions on reaching a regional resolution on addressing the funding deficit at WMATA, if any assistance is needed off of the TPB in either of those two aspects, that is something that we have staff fully provided for. We also have a small amount of funding that we have already set aside, anticipating that there might be some regionally beneficial studies we might do to advance the Better Bus project that WMATA and the local jurisdictions are working on. So this budget for FY 2024 does set aside some funding for Better Bus sort of projects.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is by approving this work plan, while there may not be something specific on the Metro funding gap issue, because we're supporting staff and other resources at TPB, they would be available to work in the regional conversation that needs to occur with regard to the future of Metro. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct, sir. You know,
Okay.
we don't know we have not received any explicit requests, but as they do, we certainly have the staff capability and we will have some limited additional funding capacities as needed. But it will be limited, but we'll have some.
Thank you. I just think this is something that TPB needs to play an active role in. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Dibala from Tacoma Park had a question here.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
This is just taking projects approved.
Are you talking specifically about the first
yeah.
action? Yeah,
Yeah.
so basically, the Unified Planning Work Program, we're under the fiscal 2023 work program right now, and it goes through the end of June. So we know that there's certain activities that we're not going to be able to complete. I alluded to one of my staff members who left a few months ago, who happens to be running the long-range plan. So my point was, we look at all staff activities, and so we know that we're not going to spend all of that money. In order to be able to access it right away on July 1st, we have to take an action, the board, to pull it from the current, it's called amending the 2023 UPWP, and then we put it into the FY 2024 UPWP in that one action. So does that answer your question?
Yes, my question was just to clarify, there's nothing new in here.
Correct.
And the 2024, the full work plan was already approved.
The 2020, so the second action we're going to ask you all to take is to approve the 2024. We have to do it in this order because we're basically pulling money from one and putting into the other. And for sure, there are no changes other than the total financial dollar amounts that you've seen from last month to this month.
Thank you very much.
It's tough. It's hard. I get it. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, there are no other questions here from those in the room.
Okay. Starting with the very first motion to adopt R7 2023 to amend our budget and work activities for fiscal year 2023. Are there any nays or abstentions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we might first want to ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, so moved. Takis Karantonis, Harlingen County.
Okay, thank you. Takis Karantonis has moved, and is there a second? I think
Brian Lee from Laurel seconded. Thank you.
Okay, and sorry about that. Okay, so again, are there any abstentions or nays to this motion?
I don't see any in the room, Mr. Chair.
Okay. If that's the case, then this motion does pass. Now I will request a motion to adopt Resolution R8 2023 to adopt our budget and work activities for fiscal year 2024.
Thank you, Brian. That was Brian Lee.
And is there a second?
Yes, Mr. Walkinshaw seconded.
It's been moved and properly second. Are there any questions in the room that you can recognize at this time?
Not that I see, Mr. Chair.
Any virtual?
No.
With that stated, are there any abstentions or nays to this motion?
None here.
With that stated, the motion does pass. Okay, and so next on the agenda is approval of the FY 2024 Commuter Connections Work Program.
Mr. Chairman, at the last FY 2024 Community Connections Work Program was presented to the board. We did not receive any comments. However, we did have one substantive change to the document. So in consultation with state funding agencies, staff have reviewed our Flex Time Flex program. This is a program, it's an incentive program, giving commuters incentives if they want to flex their time if they receive the benefit. And so what we did is we took a look at the eligible corridors for that particular program, and those had been adopted back in 2018. However, there was a new bottleneck analysis that was released by our staff. So we took a look at the eligible corridors that were in the program compared to the new bottleneck analysis and these adjustments to those corridors in consultation again with state funding agencies. And that was all signed off by DDOT, MDOT, and VDOT. So that was the only substantive change. So we are recommending adopting resolution R9-2023 to approve the draft FY 2024 Community Connections Board Program. Can I answer any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Ramphos, if not, I would request at this time a motion to adopt Resolution R9-2023 to adopt our budget and work activities for fiscal year 2024.
Take a motion. Kelly Russell from City of Frederick moves the motion.
Is there a second?
Yes, Ms. Wheeler from Prince William County has seconded. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and properly second. Any further discussion? If not, are there any nays or abstentions?
None here in the room, Mr. Chair.
With that stated, the motion passes.
Thank you.
And thank you. At this time, we'll begin informational items on the budget, beginning with an environmental justice analysis. This is an item and a brief results of the federally required environmental justice analysis of the long-range plans we adopted last year with Visualize 2045. I will note that the TPB is working to update the Visualize 2045 plan with, as we stated earlier, Visualize 2050. We will have a similar analysis done on that plan once it is updated. This is a plan that was adopted from last year. So Mr. Sergio Ritaco will share the results of the analysis. Please, Sergio, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm a transportation planner here on staff, and as mentioned, I'll be walking through the environmental justice analysis of the Visualized 2045 plan, updated in July of 2022. We must analyze our plan to understand its impact on low-income and minority populations, henceforth described as traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups, and to determine if those impacts are negatively felt for those groups or have, okay, we're doing great. We're doing great on the audio, which is good. So we need to determine if those impacts of the plan have a negative impact for those communities while it's benefiting everyone else. What's really described as a disparate impact. This test and the structure we use for it is not one that's just a TPB policies, though it certainly supports many of the goals and policies that this board has. But it is a requirement of federal guidance for all metropolitan planning organizations throughout the country. As a result, the EJ population groups that we look to analyze, low income and traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups, are used because it is part of the federal requirement. So that's why we have limited to those groups. And the test analyzes and seeks to understand if the plan itself has an adverse impact, predominantly for or suffered by EJ populations, and is appreciably more severe or greater in magnitude than those suffered by non-environmental justice populations. That disparate impact test that we've defined. Our analysis of 35 measures examines mobility and accessibility, find that the impact of Visualize 2045 does not have an adverse disparate impact on low-income and traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups. Further, we find that the planned transportation projects in the plan do have a positive impact in this region if not otherwise occurred or included. However, it is worth noting that not all measures have the same outcome. There are important differences between measures, and we'll be walking through that through this presentation. So the analysis follows a methodology that was approved by this board in 2018. It really has two phases. The first phase is the identification of equity emphasis areas. These are U.S. Census tracts with high concentrations of low-income and traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups. And then there's the analysis itself, which is what we're presenting here today. And that uses the TPB's traditional four-step travel demand model to understand the impact of the transportation projects and the changes in forecasted growth in population and jobs in this region. A really great use of this type of analysis is that it allows us to both isolate for the impacts of population and job growth, the impact of the transportation projects alone, and then the combination of the two together, which is the plan approved in July 2022. The 35 measures mentioned help us understand the changes to how people get around and how long it takes them based on the Visualize 2045 assumptions. We look at access to a few different types of places, jobs, higher educational institutions, as well as medical facilities. These were data sets that were readily available to staff and worked with our methodology, so that that's why we particularly use those. So we're certainly interested in considering other type of places as well. And the modes include auto, transit, and then various forms of transit as well. So we try to look at all types of transit, including high capacity transit, as well as those that might be limited to walking to high capacity transit and all transit in general, or walking to just the bus and are only able to use the bus system, either because the travel time to high capacity transit is too long, or they can't afford their cost prohibitive in just using the bus service. So we take a look at that as well. We also take a look at commuting AM peak period, commute periods, as well as off-peak periods as well. And so while on one of the screens that we have, I'm presenting the inputs into the analysis, there's a couple other additional caveats of this analysis that we would like to share. First and foremost is the assumption that the equity emphasis areas identified in last year, that their location and distribution remains the same up and through 2045. We recognize that there's many changes in this region within a 2025 period, and that would probably unlikely hold true, though it is an assumption that is limited based on the data we have available to us. And then secondly, are uncertainties that might arise from a model forecasting type analysis. If we try to look at the 20 and 25 years out in the future, there are certainly some uncertainties that would arise with some findings and analysis, and to be aware of that when we take a look at the results of this analysis. This is all to say that the findings of this analysis, yes, findings of analysis are really more instructive in understanding the situation and the conditions as we have it understood now as part of the 2022 update to Visualize 2045. And use this information to help us inform future transportation decisions and guide growth and land use in this region. The results of this analysis are impacted really by two main inputs. The first are the transportation projects. This include transit, highway, walk and bike projects. And these come directly from the transportation agencies and that the TPB can approve through its process. And the second input really is the forecast land use changes in job growth and population growth in this region. And those come from our planning and zoning departments of the region's local governments. And we accept those as provided as part of the analysis. We recognize that the ability to get around is impacted by both elements, and the next few slides look to provide detail on each of them and both together. So first, taking a look at and walking through land use changes and get a good sense of the growth in this region and where this forecast is to happen. The region expects large growth of people and jobs by 2045, an additional 1 million more jobs and 1.3 million more people. This is, of course, needed for a thriving economy, but it does place additional demand on the transportation system, one which that was to some degree congested already. Being mindful of this, the region does have plans to focus growth in regional activity centers and near high-capacity transit stations. Two additional insights from this land use portion of the analysis is that there will continue to be more jobs in our regional activity centers than housing. So some imbalance exists within the regional activity centers. So bringing jobs and housing together is a very effective strategy to reduce auto travel congestion. And secondly, is recognizing the distribution of jobs and people between the eastern and western parts of this region. We're finding that this sort of distribution contributes to cross-regional travel that could be contribute to over longer distances of commute and travel. So getting into more of the results in the analysis itself, given the forecasted growth and distribution, here's what we can expect the changes in accessibility to be by 2045 with no changes to our transportation system. So this is just land use growth without any of the projects included in the plan. And what we're finding is that accessibility via auto will worsen significantly, not just to jobs, but to other purposes too. This is for people in EEAs as well as those in non-EEA portions of the region. On the positive side, accessibility via transit will improve. However, presently there's about 7% of trips daily that are taken on transit, with about 25% of commute trips taken on transit, which means that this particular growth or benefit will be felt for a smaller portion of the region. On the mobility side, just looking, and so when we're speaking about mobility, we're talking about commute time periods as well as average access travel times to a particular facility or location. Where we're just looking at just to the distribution and forecast growth with no changes to our transportation system. Auto commute times will increase to both equity emphasis areas and non-equity emphasis areas portion of the region for jobs and medical facilities. Average transit commute will also increase as well, although this increase for EEAs is a little less than those for non-EEAs. And if we really think about it, if we continue to have the existing transportation system and adding a bunch of more people and jobs, this is certainly something for us to expect and understand and recognize. And if I can move on to slide. Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you, Kim. All right, so okay, so presented on the slide are those mobility slides. Pardon my slide thing didn't move. So Kim, if we can go ahead and move to the next slide, which is slide 11, please. So we'll take a moment to switch and to look at transportation projects in this region. Many of you have seen these maps before, but to summarize and to give you a little bit more information about the transportation investments in this region between now and 2045. Of the total 223 billion in planned investments, 81% of that funding, it goes to maintenance and operation of the existing system. We have allocated 19% of expenditures in Visualize 2045 available for system expansion. And where those highway and transit improvements are expected are presented on the screen. On the left-hand side are the highway investments. These are throughout the region with plans at the time of plan approval to add express lanes and HOV lanes and HOV facilities. Then on the right, we present the transit investments, which include Silver Line Phase 2, a number of ERT projects in Maryland and Virginia, and express bus service on the Virginia Express lanes. Next slide, please, Kim. So if we take a look at isolating this analysis now to just the impact of the transportation projects in this region, we find that the projects have an overwhelmingly positive impact on accessibility, both for equity emphasis areas and non-equity emphasis area portions of the region. By themselves, the transportation projects are able to get more people to more opportunities, and except in a couple instances, the amount of benefits in non-EEAs is slightly higher than those in EEAs. Which is primarily reflective of on-the-ground conditions today. However, we still are finding an improvement for all individuals in this region. Next slide, please. On the mobility measures, we find the projects still have an overwhelmingly positive impact. Commute times by auto and transit would decrease in both EEAs and non-EEAs, and not just to jobs, but to other activities as well. Once again, here the benefits to non-EEAs is slightly higher than those to EEAs, but we are reflecting a positive impact across the region. And moving on to the next slide, we start to present the results of now both main inputs into the plan: job growth and population growth, as well as the transportation projects. And this is what the analysis looks at and is what the final determination is based on. And when we examine the combined impact, these two elements, by 2045, we find that the increase in congestion and delay due to growth and land use changes eats into those benefits that we identified from just the new transportation projects alone. Overall, auto access to non-job related destinations will worsen, and access to jobs is within the model's uncertainties. There will be, however, significant improvement in transit access to jobs and other non-work destinations. When analyzing through that EEA and non-EEA geography, they often track similarly. However, on auto-based measures, EEAs often benefit slightly less and burden slightly more. On our transit measures, benefits to accessibility and mobility exist across the board for EEAs and non-EEAs, doing even better than the transportation projects alone. We continue to add more people and jobs to the existing transit system and adding more transit in this region. This leads to more jobs accessible by transit and more people in this region, in EEAs and non-EEAs as well. Next slide, please. Now, a few measures that look at mobility. A very similar story: congestion and delay, increased commute and travel times to jobs, medical facilities, and higher educational facilities across the region for both EEAs and non-EEAs. EEAs and non-EEAs also track similarly, though EEAs often benefit marginally more, or on transit, they actually benefit slightly more on transit and burden marginally more on auto. And with that, I have a couple additional slides here on conclusion and to summarize this presentation. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, to stress, the impact of our plan does comply with federal environmental justice definition for district impact. For auto-based measures, the addition of people and jobs increases congestion and delay, particularly impact EEA parts of the region to access and travel to where jobs are increasing. For transit-based travel, accessibility and mobility are improving for the region, which maximizes the use of the existing transit system, as well as adding more transit into the network. This interrelationship of land use changes and the projects in the region in the 2022 update to Visualize 2045 can lead to some regional level equity challenges and considerations moving forward for us in this work together. And with that, I'll move on to the closing slide and two additional points. The first off is and Kanti might want to lead to as well, our next steps. This analysis is very much structured to meet a federal environmental justice requirement. And we are looking and considering in fiscal year 2024 to do additional work, deep diving into our equity emphasis areas, both for better understanding of the travel characteristics within those areas, as well as other questions that we were interested in looking at that just didn't necessarily fall within the prescribed nature of this type of reporting and analysis. And secondly, and before I conclude and open for discussion and questions, is thank a whole host of staff that is part of this analysis, including Nazim Verdue, Dushan Yuxan, Nicole McCall, and a host of other people that I might be blanking at this point. But with that, I close my presentation and happy to support any questions and comments.
Thank you, Sergio. Lynn or Conti, do you see any questions, either in person or virtual?
Yes, Ms. Newton from City of Rockville.
We're going to repeat your question too, just to make sure. So go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. One thing that jumped out at me as we talk about equity is the 45% of new toll. 45% of the roads. That's something that we need to think about in terms of who gets to use those roads and like what advantage are we providing to the overall need to bring equitable transportation alternatives to everyone. Thank you for that.
So the comment was that as we look at the projects in the long-range plan, particularly when we are adding capacity to the roadway system where people have to pay a toll, what does that do for equitable access to people who have been traditionally underserved? Is the comment. Good point.
Much better stated.
Ms. Dibala from Tacoma Park, Mr. Chair has a question or a comment.
Just your comment. I looked about whether it's time change, you know, it's available. Support.
Thank you. So the suggestion was to continue to look at the methodology itself, if the methodology can be further refined. I will just take a brief detour here. This one was one of the highlights from our recent federal certification review meeting. This methodology, when we first developed and used it 4 years ago, this was brand new. When we went through our certification system, the feds asked for a separate meeting to have them walk through this. And we did it. They have now taken it to the other MPOs and saying, hey, this is what you can do, rather than the bare bones. So I think kudos to the TPB for leading that effort, for enhancing what most MPOs do, but we have added additional layer of analysis. But we continue, we continue to go to national conferences. We continue to read literature published to see what more we can do in terms of enhancing it. So as Sergio alluded to, in the work program budget that you approved earlier under item 7, we've put extra money to take a deeper dive into the equity emphasis areas, because the analysis tells us people in the equity emphasis areas, they are seeing benefits when they're using transit. But for any reason, if they are unable to use transit, they are losing access to jobs. They are losing access to educational institutions, medical facilities. So we need to better understand what are the specific characteristics within those areas. What is it? Is it the auto ownership? Is it the average household income? Is it the increasing congestion on the roadways. We have shown through the analysis that when we implement all of the projects in our long-range plan, while transit improves, highway congestion is going to worsen. So if we are going to add, or when we add highway capacity, it needs to be targeted to where there is congestion. And to answer Ms. Newton's question, it would be even better if it is targeted to where the congestion is most severely felt and experienced by the traditionally underserved population, which is around equity emphasis areas. That level of deeper information, these are all at the census tract level. So we don't have all of that information in the model, but we have put some money to say, let's go collect that information. Let's try to understand so that we can give that information back to the transportation agencies and say, here are the issues. Some of them may be non-transportation, but that is still good information for elected officials to have, what other interventions they can make to make mobility and accessibility better. But anything we find that is relevant for transportation project investment, we hope that that information will be used. So these are the ways in which we can really improve the outcome of our long-range transportation plan. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further questions or comments?
I don't see any from those in the room, Mr. Chairman.
Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce the Director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Mr. Clark Mercer. I can tell all of you guys, I had the privilege of actually meeting him as being a part of COG's committee to actually determine who the future director would be. And I can tell you on a personal level how impressed I was with this gentleman's presentation to that committee, because it was a very sincere presentation that reflected the times that we are in right now. All of the focus areas of TPB, in many ways, he alluded to in his presentation to this search committee. And so I'm proud to introduce him, because I recognize as part of his thinking is taking COG and TPB and all of the various entities to the next level. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. Clark Mercer to the TPB at this time. And please, Clark, share your general thoughts on, transportation and whatever else you have up your sleeve.
Well, thank you, Chair Collins. Oh, boy. Turn that off. What are we doing here? Turn this off?
Okay. I'm the new guy, so I don't even know how to use the microphone. So, although I'll tell you, the half hybrid, half in person presents some challenges, right? So, I've got a small slide deck, only about 40 slides. So, no, just kidding. We're good. Conti asked me to share a few of my thoughts coming into COG, priorities moving forward. And the first is to listen and to learn to the folks around the dais today. I've been starting to get out in the COG footprint and meet with COG members. I'd like to meet with TPB members, and I've got a lot to learn. For the past decade, I've been down in Richmond, serving the previous two administrations as the governor's chief of staff. I'm originally from the city of Alexandria, born and raised there, and looking to move my family back to the area. So it's only somewhat ironic that COG is charged with addressing the affordable housing shortage in the region as I look to move back to my hometown, which has unfortunately been priced out for many of the folks that I grew up with. In listening and learning to you all and setting agendas for meetings moving forward, I would say the jurisdictions here have a lot in common, which is fantastic. Priorities like affordable housing, investments in transportation and transit. How do we improve the environment, lower carbon emissions? I would also say, though, that the jurisdictions are different and have different priorities. And there's nuance to some of the policies that we discuss. I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in this region, a lot of time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and jurisdictions are different, have different priorities. And as we set meeting agendas, I understand kind of how to count votes and get folks to find consensus, but I don't think we should shy away from having open and honest discussion. And if that yields votes that are not unanimous, that's an okay thing. Some of these topics we're talking about, we all agree in concept, but how you go from where we are with affordable housing to producing 70,000 more units over the next 10 years, we need some honest debate. There's some tough policies that we have to discuss, and the same goes for transportation and transit. The previous presenter did go through in good detail kind of what COG's priorities are. They call it Region 4, we call it Region United, but it's a recognition that folks want good paying jobs. They want to be able to have decent housing and not live hours away from their job. And they want to be able to get to and from where they work and where their kids go to school without sitting in traffic for hours on end, right? I think there's a recognition over the last several years that all of those things are related, right? And if we can commute in a smart way, it's good for the environment and all of these things. We say equity ties all of these in. It's another way of saying that they're all related, right? So a lot of work has been done looking at census numbers, looking at census tracts, looking at historically underserved census tracts and census tracts with higher percentages of communities of color that we call equity emphasis areas. And that there's a desire to try and drive economic development and housing in those zones over the next decade. I think we all conceptually think that's a really good idea. How we get there is kind of the charge that COG needs to take. And I'm the new guy, right? So I can ask questions like, what do our economic development officials think about our equity emphasis areas? Are they encouraging economic development in those zones? What does the private sector think about this? If there's a disconnect there, then it's almost happenstance when economic development happens in these areas that we're prioritizing. So I think you're very familiar, and that presentation was really, really good, but there's been an inequitable economic development across this region within your counties, east-west divides, within certain parts of Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So how do we get, regardless of where you live in the area, good paying jobs, close to transit, and a quality of life that does not mean you're sitting in traffic for hours on end? This 15 years ago, I was working in Tyson's Corner. I think we can all have our stories of where we sat for hours on end, and how do we improve that? A point was made by a member a few minutes ago to look at some of our assumptions that have gone into some of these plans, and the world has changed in the last few years. And one of the areas I think we need to focus as a region really fast is when we talk about the hybrid nature of work, when we talk about the federal government's telework policy, too often that is limited to discussing the pros and cons of that hybrid nature of work, right? What are the advantages to it? What are the challenges for managers? How do you do professional development and mentorship? And how do you build brand loyalty and people staying with companies for X number of years? And that's a body of literature that will be taught in business school and public administration school for the rest of our lives, right? And let's put that aside for a moment. The federal government's hybrid work policy is having a measurable effect on the economy of the district and this surrounding area that we can measure right now. And I think we need to have a much more positive and proactive stance of how do we engage with the federal government in a positive way to look at the future of the city, and the future of the city can be national, but with a particular emphasis on the DC area. And there's a lot of federal programs right now, money, that this area can avail itself of. What are some tools the federal government can work with us on to address some of the issues that are arising out of this hybrid nature of work? I'm familiar, with the Base Realignment and Closure Commission. That happened in Virginia when Fort Monroe closed. It happens when any defense facility in the country is going to close. It gets put on notice that it may close, and they can advocate for themselves. And then ultimately, if a base closes, the Defense Department has offices that are devoted to nothing but providing that community with tools and finances to help them envision what their future can be. And that's for bases that are 500 servicemen and women and their families. This is 200,000 folks overnight that the district is grappling with. How do we respond to this? And again, that's not to say that COVID was an inflection point. The world has changed. There's tremendous benefits to the hybrid nature of work. And so I think engaging as a region with the Biden administration on this topic is really, really important, and remaining positive and proactive. What are some options that we can discuss with them? And so I'm starting to socialize that idea with members of our congressional delegation, local elected officials, getting, and I don't think, and I'm not going to ask any of you, I'm not saying anyone feels comfortable or thinks it's right or productive to say folks need to be back in their seats 5 days a week. You may feel that way, you may not. Again, put that aside. It's a recognition that the world has changed and we need to adapt and change with it. And how do we do that proactively? So I think that's a pretty big issue moving forward. I would kind of end with comments on two of the transportation projects that were brought up earlier. TPB has a really, really good reputation, putting together plans that folks know are balanced in its funding and achievable, that we can deliver on as a region. And any new administration, it's an opportunity to hit a reset button. Any new governor is going to have different priorities. And certainly with I-270 this week, that's a good example of hitting the pause button, taking a step back. How might that affect other transportation projects that were connected to the I-270 project? So taking some time on that makes sense. On Metro, Conti mentioned a $750 million operational deficit next year. This is not a problem that is years off. This is a problem that is on our doorstep. And I was involved working with many of you in 2018 when Metro did receive a new round of dedicated funding. Opening up that compact is, be careful. It's not easy. And I think what we faced in 2018 and what we face coming up for Metro next year are a vastly different scale. And so, I know General Manager Clark is thinking through what those options look like. But I think we're going to have to take a step back as a region and have some tough conversations about how Metro is funded, because clearly that's not a deficit that you can just patch up and move on from. So I think it makes sense to take a little bit more time and make sure that when we're delivering a product to FTA, that's one that we have confidence in, that's balanced, and we can execute on. So I would, obviously, I'll take action on that, I think, next month, but I would recommend we take a little bit more time and know that we're confident in what we're submitting. So with that, I look forward to coming out and meeting you all in your jurisdictions. And for those of you who have hosted me, thank you. And I'll be making my way. And like I said, lot to learn. So look forward to working. Thanks.
Thanks, Clark. Conti or Lynn, do you see any questions, either in person or virtual?
Yes, Mr. Walkinshaw has some thoughts to share.
Thank you, Chair Collins, and I just want to welcome Clark. Congratulations on the relatively new position. Clark and I had the opportunity to work together over many years, and the work that he did in Governor Northam's office, especially during the pandemic, was incredible. The outreach that they did with local governments, especially, I think, was a model. And I know he's going to bring that same approach to COG, and I think I can speak for everyone here today at TPB that we very much look forward to working with you. So thank you for coming here today. Also, give him a lot of credit. He sat through our entire meeting before his presentation, so he got to hear it all. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? No?
David Snyder.
Okay.
David Snyder.
Good afternoon. Thank you. And thanks for coming on board. I think we've got enough things to occupy you in your tenure here. I wanted to add one more, which has been a priority of this group, which is the issue of highway safety. We see that all across the region, there are needless fatalities and serious injuries. And probably next to gun violence, it's the kind of violence that occurs that can touch so many different people. So I hope that as you work on issues such as metro and affordable housing, you also help us and work with us in support of dealing in the transportation sector with the fatalities and serious injuries that are way too high in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think last month we had a presentation here on fatalities and highway safety and road safety. And I've seen both MDOT and VDOT here and the District Department of Transportation. Tremendous amount of respect for those organizations and how they're run. And a lot of it's coordination. I mean, you know your community better than folks outside your community. So where some of those intersections are, where some of those areas are where there's high propensity for there to be accidents, you know, to the extent COG can be a good facilitator and listener and getting folks' attention that can help improve crossways and crosswalks and bad behavior on the roads. It seems like in, you know, a few weeks on the job that COG is a good facilitator of those kinds of discussions. So we look to you to help communicate, because whether you're in Annapolis or Richmond, you kind of don't know what you don't know. So we need to hear from folks like yourself.
Anybody else online? Okay, we don't see anybody else online, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you again. The final item on the agenda today is WMATA request to amend the FY 2023-2026 TIP. Lynn, if you could kind of summarize this for the board.
Great, thanks. I'm going to turn to Andrew Austin, our TIP person.
Good afternoon. The packets included for item 11 today includes a letter from WMATA asking for an amendment to update the funding and projects and programs in their section. And that's there will be an amendment to the FY 23 to 26 TIP. This is 6 project and program groupings that will be amended as shown in the tables that are attached to that letter. This is an increase of $894 million. And this is including funding from the IIJA that had not originally been programmed when the draft TIP was in development because it came out a little late. The TPB this actually serves as a notice item for a 30-day public comment period that will conclude on April 13th. And at the next board meeting, the TPB will be asked to review and approve this amendment to the TIP. Allison Davis from WMATA is here. I'll ask if she has any comments.
I'll just speak loudly. It's never really been fun. So thank you, Andrew and staff. So yes, this is updating our TIP. This is the time of year that we tend to do it. It's our fiscal year starts July 1st, so there's always that off time with the federal fiscal year. And so this is adding reauthorized federal funds and then obviously the local matches that come with that, as well as some additional money from IIJA. And so this is just starting to align 23 and those couple of out years with what's in there. So we are close to adopting our final FY 24 budget. So we'll be coming back and getting that through the DC STIP as well. So this just starts to align better closely align our work with what's in the TIP.
So consistent with Ms. DeBala's earlier question for the TPB budget, these are for projects that WMATA already have on their plan thing, and they're just availing the federal funding, but that federal funding has to be reflected in the TPB TIP. So this is not something that that we can count towards the funding gap, but that's for a different fiscal year.
Yeah. And also that FY 23 is included in this amendment because of the programming schedule and the difference between the WMATA's fiscal year and the federal fiscal year.
So no action today, Mr. Chairman, but next month we will be seeking your approval so that WMATA can get access to those federal funds.
All right. Thank you, Kanti. Any further questions or comments? There are no further comments or questions at this time. We'd like to end today's meeting, so the meeting is officially adjourned. Our next meeting is April the 19th, 2023. And I will see you then. I hope everyone has a great day and a great month of March. Thank you.
Yeah.